Welcome to the new video. Given here is the full chapter explanation. We will also help you with solutions for all the questions that are given at the end of the chapter. It's a humble effort to make all the lessons and its solutions more simplified for every student. Please consider subscribing the channel and click the bell icon to be notified of the new videos. What is the difference between a monarchy and a constitutional monarchy? In an absolute monarchy, the monarch or the king holds the absolute powers, whereas in the constitutional monarchy, a country is ruled by a king or a queen within the parameters of a written or unwritten constitution. In France, under the constitutional monarchy, citizens voted for a group of electors who in turn chose the assembly. But unfortunately, not every citizen had the right to vote. Men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of a laborer's wage were entitled to vote. The major drawback of 1791 Constitution was that only rich and propertied men above 25 years of age had the right to vote. Now let us see how France abolished monarchy and became a republic. Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the richer sections of society. The less prosperous sections of the society were women, small peasants, shopkeepers, shoemakers, servants, and daily wage workers. They were not happy with the 1791 Constitution as it did not assure the right to vote for them. They wanted to carry out revolution and remove monarchy from France. People of Paris were also unhappy about the short supplies and high prices of food. So they formed political clubs to discuss the government policies and plan the further action. Women too formed their own clubs. So among the political clubs which were formed by the people, Jacobin Club was the most successful one. Maximilian Robespierre was their leader. Members of Jacobin Club adopted a different kind of attire and wore long striped trousers like dock workers because nobles wore fashionable knee breeches. These Jacobins came to be known as the sans-culottes, which means those without knee breeches. Jacobins men wore the red cap that symbolized liberty. Louis XVI, the King of France, was worried by the developments and constitutional status to France. He entered into secret negotiations with his neighboring countries to overthrow revolution in France. Countries like Prussia, Austria, and Holy Roman Empire were worried that revolutionary ideas would spread from France in their countries also. So these countries entered into secret negotiations with France. But the National Assembly of France declared revolutionary war against Prussia and Austria as a war against kings and aristocracies all over Europe. The revolutionaries sang patriotic songs like Marseillaise, which is the national anthem of France, and marched into Paris. So on August 10, 1792, Jacobins stormed the palace of Tuileries, the king's residence, which was also a symbol of absolute monarchy, and took the king as hostage. Then the National Assembly voted to imprison Louis XVI and royal family as they were convicted of conspiracy with foreign powers. Elections were held and all men above 21 years got the right to vote to elect the government. Louis XVI and his queen were sentenced to death publicly on the charge of treason. In September 1792, France was declared a republic. Republic means people elect the government, including the head of it. Thus, monarchy was abolished and a republic was established in France. The newly elected government was called the Convention. Maximilien Robespierre, the leader of Jacobin Club, became the head of the new government. The Reign of Terror. Though the republican form of government was established in France, Robespierre followed the policy of severe control and punishment. So his period of administration is called as Reign of Terror. He practiced authoritarian kind of rule under the disguise of republic. All those who were against republic were punished under the special court called Revolutionary Tribunal. Even the members of his own party who did not agree with him were arrested, imprisoned, and executed. Robespierre followed certain extreme steps in administration. Maximum ceiling on wages and prices were instituted. As a result, a person could earn only a limit. Meat and bread were rationed and was under state control. Government fixed the prices for agricultural products. More expensive white flour was forbidden. All citizens were required to eat equality bread made of all wheat. No sir or madam was allowed to address men or women, so all were citoyen, means citizen. Even the supporters of Robespierre began to demand moderation in the policies. His enemies were organized to overthrow him. Finally, in July 1794, the wealthy and middle class seized power from the Robespierre. Then he was arrested and guillotined. Guillotine was a device used in France for killing the criminals. Thus, a directory rule began in France. After the fall of Jacobin government, the wealthy and middle classes seized power from the Robespierre. They introduced a new constitution which denied the right to vote to non-propertied sections of the society. A 5-member executive called Directory was appointed to avoid the concentration of power in one person. But the directors often clashed with the legislative councils. The political instability of the Directory gave way for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, a military dictator. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was a French military leader. He became associated with Robespierre, the Jacobin leader, who was the key force behind the Reign of Terror. During this time, Napoleon was promoted to the rank of Major General. The 5-member directory was replaced with a 3-member consulate in 1799. Napoleon became the first consul and leading political figure. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself the Emperor of France. He introduced several administrative reforms that are known as Napoleonic Code. Reforms in banking and education, protection of private property, and uniform system of weights and measures were important laws in the Napoleonic Code. In the beginning, many saw him as a liberator who would bring freedom for the people. Napoleon was very ambitious and tried to extend his empire in all Europe. So he began to conquer the neighboring European countries. But he was defeated to Russia at Waterloo in 1815. Now we will see what was the role of women in French Revolution. From the very beginning of the revolution, women were active participants which brought important changes in the country of France. Women did not have access to education and they were not given the right to vote. Most women of the third estate had to work for a living as laundresses, sellers, or domestic servants in the houses of wealthy people. Most of the time, men were out for wars, so the whole responsibilities of the family were laid on the women. In order to raise their voices and interest, women started their own political clubs and newspapers. Their main demands were equal political rights with men and equal wages with men. They demanded the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly, and to hold political offices. But women had to struggle for a long to achieve their goal. Women were disappointed that Constitution of 1791 reduced them to passive citizens. But the revolutionary government introduced certain laws to improve the lives of women. By the creation of state schools, schooling was made compulsory for all girls. Fathers could no longer force them into marriage against their will. Divorce was made legal and it could be applied for by both men and women. Women could now train for jobs and they could become artists or run small businesses. During the Reign of Terror, Jacobin government issued laws ordering closure of women's clubs and banned their political activities. Many prominent and politically active women like Olympe de Gouges were arrested and executed. However, women's struggle for voting rights and equal wages continued for the next 200 years. Finally, the women in France won the right to vote in 1946. Now let us move on to the abolition of slavery in France. Slavery was the system by which people were owned by other people and forced to work for the owner. French colonies in the Caribbean region were the important suppliers of commodities like tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. The unwillingness of Europeans to work in the distant colonies created a shortage of labor on the plantations. Thus, the slave trade began in the 17th century. French merchants sailed to African coast where they bought slaves from local chieftains. Branded and shackled, the slaves were packed tightly into the ships for the 3 months voyage to the Caribbean. There they were sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor helped to improve the demand for sugar, coffee, and indigo in European markets. The National Assembly held long discussions about whether the rights of man should be extended to all French people, including the slaves. But it did not pass any laws, fearing opposition from the slave traders. In 1794, the Jacobin government abolished slavery in the French colonies. But 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in 1848. What was the impact of French Revolution on everyday life? French Revolution had great impact on the lives of men, women, and children. Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. Freedom of press meant opposing views and events could be expressed. Plays, songs, and festive processions attracted large numbers of people. Abolition of censorship was an important law, came into effect soon after the storming of Bastille in 1789. As a result, newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded the towns of France. They discussed the events and changes taking place in France. Opposing views also could be expressed. So the ideas such as liberty, equality, and justice that philosophers wrote about could be discussed and followed by the common man. Later, these ideas were carried out to other European countries. These ideas spread from France to other parts of Europe and helped to abolish feudal system in 19th century. Indian revolutionaries like Tipu Sultan and Rajaram Mohan Roy reworked on the ideas of liberty, equality, justice, and democratic rights. This gave rise to modern nationalism and creation of a sovereign nation state in India. We will learn about it in class 10 history. This is all about French Revolution. Thank you and thank you for watching.